Nature has always been part of the Los Angeles story. From its indigenous origins to the rise of the freeway metropolis, Southern California has captivated the imagination for its uncanny ability to nurture almost any plant in the world. This special episode explores the history of Descanso Gardens, a living museum of the city's evolving relationship with nature, an archive not only of documents, but of trees, flowers, and ideas. This is Lost LA.
Water is coming. What is a garden? It's a little piece of nature, yes, but why do people love gardens? What is a garden's purpose? Do people come here to learn about the plants? Flowers? Is a garden about nature? Or is a garden about culture? Actually, it's a reflection of both. It's where culture and nature meet.
A garden is a cultural creation. It's not natural. You're choosing the plants and you're putting them where you want them to grow.
The garden is always the expression of a time, a place, and the style of that time. We see that all the way through the history of the landscape.
The garden represents our cultural ambitions. It's where you demonstrate your aspirations, your sense of beauty. It's like a deep, deep volume of our culture, not only in Los Angeles, but in America and in the West. If you can read it, this is, 1001 Nights.
What are the stories that the garden can tell in a language that only humans can really understand? As we move forward into the future and our culture changes, how will that change our gardens? A visit to Descanso is like a visit to greater Los Angeles. People of all types have a cultural attraction to nature and beauty. There's something to learn here as well as to enjoy. This land is located in the Verdugo Hills, across the valley from the west-facing scarp of the San Gabriel Mountains. A walk through Descanso can be a walk through time. There are examples here of plant life and human activity that date from all of the major periods in the history of Los Angeles. From the indigenous peoples all the way to the great rush of urbanization that began in the 50s.
We are in La Cañada Flint Ridge, which is about 15 minutes from downtown LA. This climate is a very different climate than the rest of the country. It's a Mediterranean climate. We can grow many things from all around the world. That means that there's a ton of biodiversity in both animals and plants. Descanso is a living museum. The gardens have over 15,000 plants that we keep in our collections that are accredited. Each of our plants is cataloged and inventoried regularly. It means that species and varieties won't be lost. Some of our plants are critically endangered, so if they aren't in places like botanical gardens, they may not survive as a species.
Gardens are not nature. They reflect humankind's aspirations to create beauty, transcendence through plant nature.
Descanso is amazing because it has not been over-constructed or really much touched at all. What was originally here was this oak cover that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years old. The preservation of that is the most crucial part of keeping Descanso an important site for our future.
My name is Craig Torres. I am a member of the Tongva, which are the indigenous people of the Los Angeles Basin. Descanso Gardens was built on an oak woodland. There were thousands of acres at one time. Before the Spanish came to California, these oak groves were owned by communities and families. The oak tree was a source of food. It was a source of medicine. The acorn was a major starch staple for us. It really sustained my ancestors for thousands of generations on this land.
Coast live oak can be home to up to 5,000 species of insects, birds, and wildlife. They really create the environment that promotes the health of all the plants that we grow here. They continue to be a resource because they really are a cornerstone for life.
I can't stop thinking about just how old this relative is and all the generations of people that have come by and life that's passed it by. It's rare that you see something this old, especially in the Los Angeles area. They just don't exist anymore.
When the Spanish Empire and the Mexican government began carving up Southern California into giant land grants or ranchos, oak trees were some of the most obvious markers to use as boundaries. Here at Descanso Gardens, there was an old oak tree on the property that was used as one of these boundary trees. It was called Old Verdugo, and it delineated the boundary between 3 different ranchos.
The Spanish used the land for agriculture and cattle. They also brought with them a different idea about how we use the land from the native people that they discovered here. It was an agriculture that was highly controlled versus the forms of agriculture that the native people practiced.
It was the first garden migration project that came to California.
These huge ranchos were being established, thousands of acres. And when they put cattle on them, those cattle went around grazing all those thousands of acres.
The history of the Spanish colonization of California is a history of the near obliteration of native cultures in the interest of this different set of beliefs about where humans fit in nature.
When the Americans conquered California in the late 1840s, they changed the way California thought of the land again. And land became a commodity, became something to turn into profit.
At the end of the 19th century, the paradox about Los Angeles is that it had no natural advantages whatsoever. It was essentially a dry place walled in by mountains and deserts. It had no natural harbor, had no coal, had no timber, had no gold, had no rivers. They had a lot of land. How did they sell it? With an idea that this could be a garden, that the climate was somehow miraculous. They turned what was a deficiency into an enormous resource.
The big move to the state of California that eventually will make it the Golden State was a promotional deal, basically, and selling heaven on earth.
Southern California was thought of as a sort of nature's wonderland where you could grow fruit, vegetables from anywhere in the world, and not only grow them, but they would thrive. You could stroll through Los Angeles all day and not escape green at all. It was a luxurious garden city.
The idea that you could come to Southern California and for a few dollars down, grow oranges in the sun in December was a powerful lure to people. The hopes and dreams of an entire culture were, it seemed, made possible in Southern California.
Descanso Gardens began as a private estate, owned by a man named Manchester Bodie, who purchased the land in 1938. And he called it Rancho del Descanso. It was his ranch of rest. Manchester Bodie was a very successful businessman in the publishing and newspaper business. And the benefits of that were the resources to purchase 160 acres of prime real estate in La Cañada, which became his estate and is today essentially the property of Descanso Gardens. This is Mr. Bodie's study. We've accumulated some artifacts. As you can see from the setting here, he was interested in a lot of things. He was a man of business, but he was also an editor, publisher, and an avid horticulturist. I think that Bodie found a perfect situation here with his Rancho del Descanso in La Cañada and his thriving newspaper business. I think Bodie had a sense of the importance of the West in the overall historical narrative that was being written about the United States. He was focused on his ranch, his example, as an example in history of the spirit of the people on the West Coast. Equal value given to emerging urbanity and the land itself. After the construction of the house was complete, Bodie begins to landscape the property. And he was interested particularly in plants whose origin was Asia. And in doing that, he met the growers in the San Gabriel Valley of Japanese descent, who were running large-scale commercial nursery operations to provide landscape planting for the rising development that was happening in Los Angeles at that time.
The early 20th century labor force for residential gardening was really invented by Japanese immigrant and Japanese American men who came to developing metropolitan Los Angeles. They discovered that they could make a living by tending other people's gardens.
Bodie buys tens of thousands of camellia plants in 1942. He realized that he was going to need a permanent year-round source of water to irrigate them, because they come from a climate where they receive 70, 80 inches of rain a year, which was not going to happen in the Los Angeles basin. So Bodie purchased a canyon across the La Crescenta Valley in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains to produce a year-round supply of water to irrigate his camellia plantation. And that source of water still runs and provides about half the water that we use today. After Bodie establishes a viable camellia plantation here at Rancho del Descanso, that takes him into the cut flower business, because at that time in the 40s and early 50s, the camellia was a very high demand, very exotic, very fashionable flower. and particularly desirable in the Midwest and the East Coast because it blooms in the winter.
One of the themes that you see commonly in Southern California is that people arrive here and they want to grow something from home, but it doesn't necessarily grow well here. Bodie kind of took that upon himself, and he was really focused on hybridizing and creating new varieties of plants to grow. He worked with Howard Asper to create better camellias.
Bodie soon was running a thriving camellia business here that consisted of creating hybrids, creating plants for sale, and most of all, sending thousands and thousands of cut flowers to the East Coast in the winter.
At Descanso, there's one of the greatest camellia collections in the world because of the extraordinary oak cover here. The oaks and the camellias. Those forever will be the defining feature of Descanso Gardens.
The origin story of the camellias at Descanso was, for many years, not discussed.
On December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Immediately afterwards, because of pre-existing racism and just the hysteria, on February 19th, 1942, President Roosevelt issued an executive order, 9066, which enabled the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans from the West Coast without any trial or hearing. Just if you were of Japanese ancestry, someone like me had to be removed from our homes and go into the interior 10 camps throughout the United States that held 100,000 Japanese Americans. After that executive order, these American citizens and American residents had to leave all their belongings behind. They had to sell their property at cut-rate prices. In Southern California, 1,000 acres of flowers were farmed by Japanese Americans. And that was kind of half of the flowers in the whole region.
Bodie, along with his superintendent, Howard Asper, saw a business opportunity in this moment. But they also had this deep compassion for the Japanese Americans who had become their friends through the camellia trade. Bodie bought the entire inventories from two Japanese American families, the Uematsu family of Star Nursery and the Yoshimura family of the San Gabriel Nursery. They were camellia growers. He paid a fair price for the plants and triggered the idea that he could actually use his Rancho del Descanso as a business enterprise in the camellia trade. Bodie also took over and helped run during the period of internment a nursery that was owned by the Yoshimura family. And that business continues to this day.
This is the ledger of the landscaping accounts that the nursery did. It ends on April 8th, 1942. As you can see, all the rest of the pages are blank. This is when they were sent away. The camellias that are at Descanso Garden, many came from my family's nursery, and they're still thriving and have outlived my grandparents. It's a very nice connection to have.
It never made any sense to me that the origin of the camellias needed to be somehow hidden or apologized for or muffled. The Japanese American community was immensely influential in the San Gabriel Valley and other parts of Los Angeles.
The reintegration of the Japanese from an alien race that had to be locked up to pillars of the community, in a sense, it was an enormous step forward. By the 1960s, those people had come back. Their reintegration into the fabric of this community, part of it symbolically was in the building of Japanese gardens here at Descanso. And they built these beautiful things as a celebration, in essence, of their culture, but also that they were being reintegrated into American culture after the trauma of internment.
After the war, Bodie began to look upon Rancho del Descanso as a possible business enterprise. And to pursue his interest in horticultural development, he hired Dr. Walter Lammerts, who was a very well-known plant biologist and hybridizer. Lammerts had a particular interest in roses, and very shortly thereafter, we find in the records the evidence of a new garden, a rose garden. It was about an acre, and it featured roses that Lammerts had hybridized here. Today, visitors to the gardens will see a rose garden with over 3,000 rose plants, representing both New World and Old World roses. From the standpoint of decorative horticulture, the rose is probably the single best known and most well-loved decorative plant in the world.
Roses are really interesting because they're this amazing plant that we've been growing and manipulating for thousands of years. There are so many different species and varieties. In our garden, we have over 600 varieties of roses, and that's just a drop in the bucket. We're standing right by Queen Elizabeth, which is a rose that was hybridized at Descanso Gardens by Walter Lammerts. It was actually his first rose that he hybridized at the gardens and one of his most famous roses. He was really important in the hybridization of roses at this time. A lot of roses were failing because the genes were overbred. He brought in different genetics from species roses that really helped the roses flower and grow better. He bred a whole new class of roses called the Grandiflora roses, and this is an example of that type of rose.
A whole new category of roses was created by human intervention. That category of plant bloomed early, it bloomed often, and it bloomed steadily. And it's the bloom, it's the flower that we love. Because people are pollinators too.
My name is Tom Caruth. I'm a rose hybridizer. My career now has spanned 38 years. I've introduced 142 varieties, many of which are here in Descanso Gardens. This is Cinco de Mayo, Wild Blue Yonder. This is Sentimental. When you go about crossing a rose, you have a goal in mind that you want to achieve. It can be petal shape, shape of the flower, certainly the fragrance, and the color is a big factor because that's your first impact. This is Julia Child. This rose has been introduced in England, in Japan, in France, in Czechoslovakia, in South Africa, in Australia. It's going to be in the top 5 of my entire career, I'm certain.
Roses have a number of meanings in different cultures. First of all, they're gorgeous. They smell amazing. Roses are also this kind of a paradox. They have this extraordinary feminine beauty and this kind of quite vicious armor with the thorns. So it's poetically fruitful. It provides metaphors.
For much of the 20th century, Los Angeles thought that it could tame nature, it could conquer nature. In some ways, you can look at Descanso Gardens and the roses and the camellias and various plants here, and you can see a recapitulation of that taming of nature.
I think a rose is just a good way to demonstrate your taste, your success, the climate that you live in. Anybody who gardens would like to be able to show off their garden if they're successful. It's always an aspect of culture. That's what culture means, is to actually grow plants.
If you do it well, it's a demonstration of your own culture.
Flowers are just like almost any other commodity. They go in cycles and trends. As the 40s unfolded after the war, new competition was introduced in the cut flower business due to new forms of freight transportation, particularly the aircraft. And Bodie was smacked with a terrible case of plant disease that killed lots of his camellia plants. Bodie has a hypothesis that he can find a way to continue to make a good living, but be more closely connected to his land. In 1950, as an experiment, Bodie opened his estate to the public. He did a little bit of publicity, opened his gates, and on this momentous day attracted over 5,000 visitors to his ranch. The neighbors were so shocked by this one Sunday in May that when Bodie began to seek the necessary legal permission to operate his privately owned property as a public attraction, he was denied the permits because of neighbor resistance to the idea of having a commercial activity sprout up in their private neighborhood. Not in my backyard. After several months of campaigning to get the permissions necessary to do that, it became clear to Bodie that he was not going to be successful. Bodie does what a businessman does. Bodie says, all right then, if you won't let me operate my business the way I want to on property that I own, then I'm going to sell. Bodie puts the estate on the market and discovers this interest from developers, of course. It's a beautiful piece of property in the middle of a growing suburban community that's quite well off. He finds Walt Disney. He has this idea for a theme park that features his characters. Bodie finds interest in other areas of how the property could be used. One of them as solid waste disposal facilities. Because the shape of this land is perfect. It's a large bowl that faces east. There were a number of proposals, each one of which seemed to be a worse fate for the property than what Mr. Bodie proposed. It was then that the neighbors organized themselves and made an approach to the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors to purchase Bodie's estate, the house, the canyon with the water, everything associated with the newly named Descanso Gardens, and add it to their growing inventory of public gardens.
Southern California in the 1950s was in the midst of a huge economic and population boom. Los Angeles County and its government saw facilitating that urban growth as its mission. And it did that through the construction of freeways, the construction of storm drains and sewers, all of this infrastructure that would support the growing footprint of the metropolis. Within that impulse was a recognition that the residents of LA County might need green spaces. The county's purchase of Descanso Gardens in the early 1950s could be seen as part of its mission to facilitate the growth of the Southern California region.
Post-World War II, Southern California was intoxicated with its own growth and horrified by it. It was exploding, doubling in population almost as you watched it, in what's essentially a place where you shouldn't have 22 million people. The garden became an even more important aspect of maintaining our rationality, maintaining our health. People felt that they needed to flee the city to rediscover the garden. And so we spread farther and farther. And now there are 22 million people from the Mexican border to Santa Barbara, all looking for that garden.
when the boom in population takes place in Southern California and houses are closer and closer together, leaving less and less land for gardens. More and more, it's necessary to have these lungs in an urban landscape, these lungs where we can actually breathe and reconnect with ourselves in nature.
It soon became apparent that Descanso Gardens wasn't a priority for Los Angeles County. The gardens were reporting huge losses every year. Some on the Board of Supervisors thought it might be better to sell the land.
Many of the same neighbors who had organized against Bodie, they formed a support group. They organized themselves into a group they called the Descanso Gardens Guild, and they began doing fundraising projects. None of them were horticulturists. None of them were botanists. They were just good, solid, community-minded people who wanted to preserve and protect this beautiful asset for future generations. In 1957, when the Guild got organized, they wrote a vision statement for themselves. And the vision statement is the base of the garden's mission to this day. These volunteers, the ladies and the one gentleman of the Guild, started something that was based upon their love of having this garden in their neighborhood. The garden was about education. It was about learning to appreciate the plants, learning to love the flowers, and learning to look at the place as a part of our collective culture and heritage. The Guild's first project predicted the future of Descanso down the line. The ladies of the Guild had influence from a very, very important person in the horticulture history of Los Angeles, and that's Theodore Payne.
Theodore Payne was an English horticulturist. He moved to Southern California when he was 20 and fell in love with California native plants. He saw that these plants were being destroyed by development in the turn of the last century. So he brought them into cultivation. And over the course of his career, became a great advocate and educator for California native horticulture.
The idea they come up with is to celebrate native habitat and native plants, to show people that there were alternatives to the manicured lawn, the roses in the flower beds aesthetic that is really deeply embedded in American history, primarily because it was imported from Europe.
I think the English lawn is a perfect manifestation of how our gardens are really migration products. Many of our ideals of the perfect garden have been transplanted from England to the East Coast to Southern California, where we all know now water is scarce. But our gardens have been designed as though we lived in rainy England.
A grassy front lawn is kind of an inherited notion that nobody really questions, but at the time it was a pretty radical assertion. It was an assertion by British aristocrats who had land that they could show that they didn't need to cultivate that land. Lawn is culture probably at its least sensitive to what nature is. There's no such thing as a lawn in nature. A lawn is a monoculture with a single species. And in a climate like this, it takes a lot of water, which makes it a questionable proposition.
We need to rethink how we live in this place. It's just not sustainable for everyone to have a front lawn. It's not appropriate to modern life.
The Guild is energized by their excitement for having Descanso Gardens in their neighborhood. They decide that they want to position Descanso as a botanical garden with an education purpose. Their first project, the California Native Garden. Their second project in 1966 was a refreshment stand, which turned into one of the jewels of the Descanso experience today, which is a Japanese-style garden featuring a Japanese tea house.
My name is Mary Matsumoto, and I was the first manager of the Japanese tea garden. We served them tea and cookies. I was just very proud to work here. I've enjoyed it, and coming back, it brings fond memories of this place.
To give you the larger context of the 1960s, Japanese stuff was very in vogue and cool. And we had the Japanese Deer Park in Buena Park, the tea house of the August Moon with Marlon Brando. In that context, that's why so many people were drawn to this spot when the tea house opened. So here are a lot of postcards, kind of collector's items, and talking about Mary. Mary, isn't that you?
Yes, it is. That's me.
Do you remember taking this photo?
Yes, I do.
What do you remember about it?
I had to wear a kimono.
I think people like the feeling of going into another world. And I think that's what people get when they go into a Japanese garden.
People coming to Southern California were intrigued by the idea that they were all of a sudden on the Pacific Rim, looking toward Asia, trying to understand what that experience was.
The Japanese-style garden looks completely different from any other garden that surrounds it. And yet it's made with the same materials. The one thing that's different is the cultural language that inhabits those two very different types of aesthetics. Once again, the Japanese influence comes back into the history of Descanso Gardens, but it does something else for us. What it does is present in stark terms proof that gardens are cultural artifacts as much as tributes to nature.
There's no doubt that garden culture changes with the larger culture. Our culture has changed so fast, it's so complex, that gardens, in a sense, are the best way to look at us because it's an unguarded back door. We watch the changes in our gardening practice. It's watching the changes in our hopes and our dreams, in our fears, in our idea of love and beauty, even racial identity. A garden is a very, very subtle conversation, and we often don't know what we're saying or what we're hearing, but we engage in it.
One of our newest projects is mapping our irrigation. There's a lot of old systems in the ground that are decades old and need repairing. While Jose is putting in new irrigation systems, I'm mapping them, and then also as we find old ones, we're making notes on what we need to do to repair those and whether those need to be taken out.
Este es uno de los del sistema viejo que es de lo que estamos reemplazando. Se puede ver el hoyo, 40, 50 años de viejo eso, por eso lo estamos cambiando, haciendo sistema nuevo.
Doing this helps us to be more sustainable and use our water more efficiently and make sure that it's getting to the right places.
When Bodhi planted the camellias, he didn't really think about the health of the oak trees. Camellias are actually growing actively in the summertime, and that's when they need a majority of their water. Unfortunately, the oaks are dormant in the summertime, and they prefer not to have water. Over time, the oaks are deteriorating because of all the irrigation that's going on to keep the camellias growing. In order to make sure both oaks and camellias stay at Descanso, we are moving irrigation so that it's further away from the oak trees. We have to think about in the long term how to balance the needs of both plants. The gardens use over 55,000 gallons of water a day when we're watering our ornamental gardens. So the gardens really started focusing on our water use in 2010. By paying a little more attention to when our water was available, we reduced our water use by 65%. We have a ways to go, but it's our focus because we know that it's a limited resource in California.
Los Angeles built aqueducts to import water from distant watersheds. It turned its streams, its rivers and creeks into concrete flood control channels. The Southern California we know today wouldn't exist without imported water.
Water is essential for life, and no more essential than in a garden. Someone described it once to me as the melody in the music of a garden. I wouldn't say that there's a scarcity of water in California. The demand that human activity has placed upon the water supply here is the issue. Our goal at Descanso is to get to the point where we do not purchase potable water to irrigate with. That means as long as our spring is running up in the Hall Beckley Canyon, we know how much water that has produced. And we're trying to fit our need for irrigation water to that available supply.
Without a doubt, American gardening culture came barreling into a different landscape with a bunch of foreign things and a bunch of foreign ideas and imposed them on the place without asking really for a second what belongs here, what does well here, what's beautiful here. And we've done an enormous amount of damage with that gardening culture.
Every time there's a drought, people become interested in saving water. That makes sense. But this time, the drought coincided with an interest in living local. There's a broad cultural movement in looking at how we live our lives. I think that has really enforced an interest in natives.
In Southern California, there has been a significant drought for the last 5 years or so. And one of the things that it really indicated to us at the gardens is that we need to redefine landscapes in Southern California and demonstrate a Southern California garden.
This is the native oak woodland. This space was created to mimic what it would have looked like here about 300 years ago. We have mugwort, oaks, of course, annual wildflowers, white sage, California poppies, quite a large variety of native plants. It was important for Descanso to create the oak woodland to demonstrate what a natural space would look like and to show the public, even though it's wild looking, it's still a garden. Considering I haven't watered here in over a year and a half, it really isn't necessary to have that much water to make a green space. You also are going to create habitat at home once you add in native plants. It's amazing how many bees you'll start seeing. I created a native plant garden in my backyard, and I just saw a morning cloak butterfly, which usually is in oak woodlands, and I saw it at home. And I'm in a pretty urban area, so that was really exciting for me to see.
One of the goals in researching and building this particular habitat was to make physical, visible, and beautiful ideas behind sustainability. Things that we do with the land do not subtract from the ability of the land to keep doing those things in the future. But the idea here is to reshape and redefine the role of a garden in the public discourse. For centuries, gardens have been about collecting and displaying the exotic. Well, today, there's nothing more exotic than truly wild land that's being managed on a sustainable basis. And one of our goals is to be a leader in that movement, because for many, many, many years, Los Angeles was a leader in the other movement, which was importing anything and everything from every corner of the world, because almost anything will grow here. This is a different kind of beauty that helps us regain a sense of relationship with the land that we are responsible for.
See how you use this? You more scrape, like this. So Noah, instead of doing this, Noah, watch what I'm doing. Back and forth. So Dan, hold it up while you're walking so it doesn't drag on the ground, okay? We don't want you to trip over it. Great. The Harvest Garden program got started in 1964. It was the first program started by the Guild. Today we are working with the 5 Acres class. We've had the great opportunity since February to be working in the oak woodlands. When children come here, they have the opportunity to learn about plants and animals. They learn about how to work together as a team. We're teaching children that they're the future stewards of this land, and it's here for them to take care of.
I am drawing my tree. It is a California sycamore. I haven't been here in 3 months, and it has changed a lot.
A lot of the students that come in the Harvest Garden program are at-risk youth. This is a program and a place where children can come as they are. My hope is that it brings to them what it brings to me, which is a sense of connection to each other and connection to nature and where we all come from. Being in nature is so important. It's something, sadly, that a lot of kids don't get to do. And so when they come here, they get to spend an hour and a half just exploring, using their senses in a way that you don't get to do in the regular classrooms.
I just feel calm and just like safe and just very free.
You could look at this garden as a sort of a timeline of what Californians, Angelenos have thought about themselves over time. The establishment of this garden was trying to resurrect or frame this nostalgic, romantic idea of the California rancho. The oak trees and the native plants and the sort of hilly landscape are testament to that. Moving through time, you see that Victorian impulse of plant collecting and, in a sense, having a sort of a habitat atlas of every place in the world right in your own home. And that moves into the reintegration of the Japanese, the reintegration of a sort of multicultural identity, and now moving back towards a more balanced relationship with the nature that's actually here, reintegrating native plants and native processes and ecosystems. You can chart our progress, both moral and, in a sense, our self-awareness, by looking at the stages of this garden.
This year, we will attract 500,000 people to come and absorb the environment, appreciate the beauty, and the lessons that it has to teach.
Every step that we take as we plant and grow things, we're trying to make it healthier for the next generation.
To plant a garden is to invest in the future. Looking at Descanso, I see a new gardening narrative. I see meadows being made. I see butterflies. I see a new relationship to land where we all live. And I see an intention which we all need to consider.
This place touches people in all stages of their lives, from the 5-year-old who comes and sees a lizard for the first time to someone getting married here or spending their retirement walking every day. It's a big part of people's lives.
The garden will never be finished. It's always changing. And managing that change for the health of the land, for the contribution to the culture, is the highest level of stewardship. We're conserving it as a record of the changing relationships human beings have had with nature. Because who knows what the future holds, really? But we do know that the values of the future will be reflected in the gardens that they build. And what could be more important and more rewarding than that?